The Galarkians prided themselves on their long, unbroken history of victory, a sequence of planetary conquests so absolute that they had long stopped considering the possibility of failure. They saw themselves as the pinnacle of intelligence and sophistication in the galaxy, beings of superior intellect and unmatched technological prowess. Humans, in their eyes, were just a minor evolutionary hiccup. When they learned humans had joined the coalition forces as a last line of defense against their expansion, they barely contained their amusement. Reports from scouts painted a laughable picture of Earth's finest soldiers. Armed with minimal weaponry compared to Galarkian standards, humans were viewed as little more than relics from an ancient age. But there was one thing that the Galarkians found particularly bewildering and endlessly amusing: human infantry dogs. According to their intelligence reports, humans had brought trained animals, dogs of all creatures, into a battle where even cutting-edge scanners could barely keep up. As far as the Galarkians were concerned, the sight of human soldiers lining up beside these primitive creatures was the ultimate admission of their inferiority. "Imagine needing pets to help you fight," scoffed one of the commanders, his voice dripping with disdain as he watched footage from the latest battlefield preparations. The humans looked small, outmatched, their lines dotted with what the Galarkians saw as ridiculous four-legged companions. The Galarkian soldiers chuckled among themselves, exchanging jokes about humans' weakness and the absurdity of relying on animals to watch their backs. To the Galarkians, the notion of humans depending on beasts like dogs wasn't just a tactical error. It was a fundamental flaw in human nature, an almost laughable display of sentimental attachment. As the alien commanders watched from afar, observing the humans prepare, they interpreted every gesture, every careful stroke on their dog's fur, every glance exchanged as pure weakness. These earthlings were visibly attached to their dogs in a way that bordered on vulnerability. One Galarkian strategist, suppressing laughter, hypothesized that humans clung to these animals out of desperation, a kind of psychological crutch for an already outmatched species. In their eyes, the humans and their dogs were pitiable, scrambling for connection in a galaxy that had left them behind. Yet, despite the ridicule, the humans stood firm, unfazed by the scorn. While Galarkians derided the idea of dog-assisted soldiers, the humans quietly made their preparations, their faces calm, their movements deliberate. They didn't flaunt their canines, nor did they treat them as mere tools. Instead, every soldier seemed to work in quiet unison with their animal partner, an unspeaking understanding pulsing between them. The Galarkians could see the bonds but dismissed them as pointless. After all, their cloaking technology would render any tracking efforts obsolete. Their dismissal went further, rooted in a cultural belief that anything outside pure logic and technology had no place in warfare. Galarkian soldiers were trained from birth to rely on precision, mathematics, and strategy devoid of emotional influence. To them, the very idea of bonding with a creature was beyond useless. It was nonsensical, a relic of primitive species who clung to archaic traditions. They assumed that humans, being far less advanced, were doomed to these flawed instincts, wasting their efforts on emotional dependencies rather than hard tactics. The Galarkian leaders took this view a step further, convincing themselves that the humans had actually brought dogs to the battlefield not out of strategy, but out of some misplaced sense of comfort. It was as if the dogs were their lucky charms, a misguided attempt to bolster morale in the face of inevitable defeat. These commanders, so removed from the reality of the battlefield, made no plans to counter the dogs, viewing them as nothing more than distractions that the humans could ill afford. And so, the stage was set. The Galarkians confidently waited, knowing they had the advantage. To them, the humans' attachment to their animals only reinforced their own superiority, like spectators mocking an amateur magician performing with outdated tricks. The humans would bring their best efforts and their loyal beasts, but to the Galarkians, it would make no difference. They expected the battle to end quickly, with humans left helpless, mourning their useless canines and, ultimately, their planet. The Galarkian forces moved into position, their cloaking technology rendering them virtually invisible as they settled into the dense, rocky terrain of the uninhabited planet. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and smug satisfaction as they observed the human soldiers making their approach, each one accompanied by a dog. From their vantage points, the Galarkians found it all the more amusing to watch the disciplined formation of these primitive creatures, on the ground below, marching side by side with what they still perceived as nothing more than pets. The terrain was challenging, jagged cliffs, dense underbrush, and narrow valleys creating a complex network of paths. The Galarkian commanders had analyzed this environment down to the last detail, fully confident in their plans. They had chosen this planet precisely because its geography made cloaking technology even more effective. Their goal was simple: pick off the human soldiers one by one, demoralizing them and leaving them stranded with no place to hide or escape. They had no doubts that, given the limited visibility and lack of any native inhabitants, their cloaking tech would make them nearly impossible to detect. As the Galarkian troops adjusted their equipment and positioned themselves, they discussed the tactical advantages that lay in their technology. They had scanners capable of detecting any heat signature or electronic signal within miles. The humans wouldn't even get close, they believed. And as for the dogs? The Galarkians couldn't imagine that anything so biologically simplistic could pose any real challenge. They expected the animals to panic, to become liabilities, adding chaos to an already disorganized human front. Down below, human forces were getting into their own formations, working in a methodical silence that seemed to surprise the Galarkian observers. Despite the harsh conditions, the human soldiers didn't hesitate or appear distracted. Their canine companions moved alongside them with an eerie sense of purpose, sniffing at the air, pacing forward with heads low, ears alert. From the Galarkian perspective, the humans seemed to be clinging to an outdated sense of order and cooperation, qualities that had no place in a modern war. Galarkians preferred structured units, where each soldier operated like a cog in a machine. They considered human spontaneity and apparent adaptability as crude and inferior. As they watched, a Galarkian officer leaned in, studying a screen displaying the battlefield layout. He smirked, gesturing at the heat signatures of the human soldiers and their canine units, almost glowing in the scanner's output. In contrast, the Galarkian soldiers, cloaked and undetectable, were rendered as faint outlines. The officer allowed himself a chuckle. The humans wouldn't know what hit them, he thought. They'd be blindsided, outflanked, and picked off before they even saw the enemy. Meanwhile, the human soldiers continued moving forward, undeterred. Each step was deliberate, their coordination seamless as they relied on silent signals and hand gestures. The Galarkians could only watch as the humans spread out across the rocky terrain, still completely unaware of the cloaked figures lying in wait. The dogs moved with their handlers as if sensing something hidden, something beyond the range of human technology. The Galarkian commanders were so certain of their advantage that they didn't even consider the possibility that the dogs might detect them. To them, it was absurd. The idea that dogs, creatures limited to scent and sound, could counteract cloaking technology was laughable, a thought they wouldn't entertain for even a second. They believed their superiority was so absolute that their advanced tech rendered them practically invisible. The Galarkians grew increasingly impatient as the humans continued to advance, showing no sign of detection. They expected the dogs to falter by now, to sense the overwhelming presence of an enemy they couldn't see or hear and panic. Yet each dog kept pace, their movements deliberate and calm, tails low, ears pricked forward. The Galarkian officers whispered among themselves, speculating that perhaps the humans had trained their dogs better than expected, not that it mattered. In the end, training wouldn't save them. As the Galarkians waited for the right moment to strike, they took one last scan of the battlefield. They zoomed in, smirking as they watched the humans, so oblivious, so vulnerable. They couldn't fathom that, in mere moments, these same, primitive beings would be closing in on them, forcing them to reconsider everything they had assumed about human tactics and canine capabilities. The Galarkians were utterly convinced that they held every advantage in this battle, a miscalculation that would cost them dearly. The moment arrived. The Galarkian soldiers, cloaked and confident, inched forward to begin their ambush. They moved soundlessly, their high-tech gear making each footfall undetectable, their weapons primed and ready. But just as they were about to strike, something unexpected happened. One of the German shepherds lifted its head, nose twitching as it caught an unfamiliar scent in the air. A low growl rumbled from its throat, catching the attention of its handler, who immediately signaled the other soldiers to halt. The Galarkians froze in place, puzzled and slightly annoyed. They couldn't understand what had alerted the dog. By all their calculations, they should have been invisible, inaudible, unscentable. Yet there it was, the humans' loyal dog, glaring straight at their position. Before the Galarkians could react, other dogs began to pick up the scent as well. Soon, a chorus of low growls filled the air, each canine locking onto something that remained hidden to the human eye. The human soldiers exchanged glances, acknowledging what the dogs had detected. With a few rapid hand signals, the humans shifted formation, dropping low and blending into the terrain, following the silent cues of their canine partners. The Galarkians watched, baffled. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They had expected panic or confusion, but instead, they saw calculated movements, a precise adjustment as the humans began to react to the dog's cues. What followed was something the Galarkians couldn't have predicted. The humans moved forward in sync with their dogs, weapons ready, senses heightened. The dogs became more than just companions. They were now the guides, directing the humans' gaze toward the invisible enemy. Each dog pointed its handler toward the hidden Galarkian positions with a sharp look or a subtle tug. The Galarkians, still hidden by cloaks, found themselves being tracked by creatures relying on instinct and sense far beyond their understanding. A wave of discomfort rippled through the Galarkian ranks as they realized the humans were closing in. They tried to reposition, but every slight movement, every shift in the air, seemed to draw the dogs' attention. The Galarkians watched in growing frustration and fear as the humans moved in, now acutely aware of their proximity. The Galarkians had no choice but to break their positions, triggering the humans to open fire. Shots rang out, precise and coordinated, each one forcing the Galarkians further back. One Galarkian soldier, panicked and bewildered, glanced at his commander, his voice filled with disbelief. "How are they tracking us? We're cloaked," he whispered urgently. The commander had no answer. The thought that these primitive creatures were able to track them was unthinkable. Yet, here they were, being systematically hunted by humans and their dogs. The dogs, undeterred by the sounds of gunfire or the whir of alien technology, continued their relentless pursuit. They moved through the rough terrain with agility, their senses attuned to every hint of movement, every scent left by the Galarkians. The Galarkian soldiers found themselves trapped, unable to move without alerting the dogs. The humans advanced steadily, their focus unwavering, trusting in their dogs as if they were an extension of themselves. The Galarkians tried to regroup, to turn their cloaks to full power, hoping to escape detection. But the dogs, relentless in their pursuit, seemed to pierce through every layer of technology the aliens threw at them. No matter how quiet, how hidden the Galarkians tried to remain, the dogs tracked them without fail. Each time a Galarkian moved, they found themselves exposed, surrounded by human soldiers ready to strike. Panic began to set in among the Galarkian ranks. They had underestimated these creatures, miscalculated the bond between human and dog, and now, every step they took brought them closer to defeat. Their cloaking technology, their advanced weaponry, everything they had relied upon to ensure victory, was being dismantled by creatures they had once laughed at. The realization settled in like a stone. Their technological superiority was useless against something as simple, as natural, as the keen instincts of a dog. As the humans closed in, the Galarkians began to experience fear in a way they hadn't anticipated. They were outmatched not by technology but by something they couldn't even begin to understand, a bond between two species that relied on trust, loyalty, and instinct rather than machinery and programming. In that moment, the Galarkians felt the weight of their own arrogance. Their cloaks flickered as they retreated, unable to maintain the strength they once believed was absolute. And as they fell back, the dogs pursued, relentless, unyielding, each step a reminder of the cost of underestimating humanity and its allies. With every Galarkian exposed, the tide of the battle turned. The humans, once the targets of ridicule, now commanded the field, their dogs leading them with an efficiency and determination that shattered any remaining Galarkian resistance. The Galarkians, disoriented and fearful, could do nothing but flee, the sound of barking and the crack of gunfire chasing them into the depths of the alien wilderness. The Galarkian forces were reeling, their carefully planned ambush shattered by the dogs' relentless detection. Forced to regroup, they attempted to create distance, hoping their cloaking devices could finally break the humans' tracking abilities. But the humans, with their dogs guiding them, pressed forward, not giving the Galarkians a chance to re-establish control. Every time the aliens shifted to another position, every time they attempted a new angle, the dogs were there, sensing, tracking, and guiding the humans directly to them. In a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand, the Galarkian commanders ordered their troops to set decoys and traps throughout the rocky terrain. They relied on their technology to create false heat signatures, hoping to mislead the dogs and, by extension, the human soldiers. Yet, as the Galarkians watched with growing dismay, they saw the dogs quickly picking up on the difference, sniffing past the decoys without hesitation. Each dog, seemingly aware of the trick, would move right past the false signals, undeterred, their focus unbroken. Galarkian frustration turned to outright panic as their most sophisticated maneuvers were effortlessly bypassed. The dogs were adapting, honing in on the real threats, rendering each tactic obsolete within moments. No matter what countermeasures the Galarkians deployed, the dogs found them out, exposing every last soldier trying to hide. For the first time, the Galarkian commanders realized they were facing an enemy that defied their understanding, a force that moved without the constraints of their technology or logic. Seeing their most advanced tactics falling apart, the Galarkians shifted to more direct measures. They launched an offensive, abandoning their cloaks and relying instead on sheer firepower, attempting to overwhelm the humans in a close-quarters assault. The battlefield erupted into chaos, with energy blasts scorching the rocks and dust filling the air. But the humans, trained and prepared, moved as one with their dogs, weaving through the fire, each soldier trusting their canine partner to guide them. The dogs led their handlers around Galarkian positions with remarkable precision, barking out warnings, alerting them to incoming attacks, even diving forward to expose Galarkian locations. The humans responded instantly, firing on targets with deadly accuracy, each shot making it clear they weren't backing down. In every move, every alert, every bark, the dogs became crucial partners, their instincts and reflexes countering the Galarkians' aggression with astonishing effectiveness. In the midst of this intense exchange, the Galarkian soldiers, used to operating with cloaks and distance, began to experience the true nature of human resolve. Despite the advanced weaponry being fired their way, the humans kept pushing forward, each one backed by a dog that seemed just as determined to win. The Galarkians had expected fear, maybe even retreat, but what they faced instead was a force that grew stronger, more coordinated, with each challenge. The humans' resilience, combined with the dogs' unshakable focus, created a relentless force that the Galarkians couldn't comprehend. As the combat raged, a Galarkian officer, desperate and bewildered, called out to his commander. "These creatures, they don't back down. It's as if they know our every move." The commander, watching in grim silence, could only shake his head, realizing the truth. The humans weren't psychic, nor were they technologically superior. They were simply working in harmony with creatures who saw, heard, and sensed beyond anything their instruments could detect. This was a type of strength the Galarkians hadn't considered, a strength born from a bond they couldn't replicate. In the next hour, the Galarkian ranks began to falter. They were running low on options, exhausted and disoriented by the relentless pursuit. The humans kept coming, their dogs leading the way with unyielding determination, giving the humans a decisive edge. Each canine worked seamlessly with its handler, their coordination proving too much for the Galarkians' fading resolve. The aliens, so used to technological dominance, now found themselves outmaneuvered by sheer teamwork and trust, concepts they had dismissed as human weaknesses. Gradually, the Galarkians realized the truth of their predicament. They were being outmatched not by technology, or even firepower, but by something far simpler, something rooted in loyalty and instinct. No device, no advanced scanner, could replicate what the dogs were doing. The Galarkians' belief in their superiority crumbled as they saw their soldiers fall, one by one, to an enemy that had defied their every expectation. As the last Galarkian strongholds began to falter, the humans and their dogs pressed forward without pause. The dogs, unfazed by the battle around them, drove the remaining forces into a corner, revealing every hiding place, disrupting every last line of defense. The Galarkians could no longer hold their positions, retreating in a disorganized scramble. They had lost any semblance of control, forced to confront the terrifying reality that they had been bested by creatures they had once scorned. In that final, crushing moment, the Galarkian commanders understood their mistake. They had viewed humans and their dogs as primitive, limited, and predictable. But in the heat of battle, they had witnessed a strength they hadn't accounted for, a bond that transcended any technology they could create. And as the humans advanced with their canine partners, the Galarkians saw that this bond was more powerful than any weapon they possessed. It was a force of nature, one they had underestimated to their ruin. The Galarkians, battered and demoralized, finally abandoned their positions, retreating across the rocky terrain with what little strength they had left. They had come to this planet confident, convinced of their superiority, yet now they were reduced to fugitives, driven into disarray by an enemy they once mocked. Their cloaking technology was useless against the unrelenting pursuit, and every calculated escape route turned futile as the dogs anticipated their every move. The Galarkian retreat wasn't orderly or strategic. It was a frantic scramble to survive, haunted by the constant sound of barking and the eerie precision of the human-dog teams advancing upon them. The remaining Galarkian commanders struggled to make sense of the defeat, but no analysis could answer how they had lost control so completely. What they had dismissed as the humans' emotional crutch had turned into a formidable weapon, one that dismantled every advantage they thought they held. The Galarkians had encountered the humans' true strength, a strength rooted not in technology, but in something far older, something primal and irrefutable. They realized, with a sense of dread, that their advanced scanners and cloaking fields were no match for the raw senses of these creatures. As they retreated, one Galarkian officer muttered, "They were supposed to be primitive, the dogs. They weren't even supposed to matter." His voice trailed off, overtaken by disbelief. His words, meant to reassure, fell hollow. Every Galarkian soldier, from the lowest ranks to the highest, now understood the price of their arrogance. Meanwhile, the humans advanced, calm but relentless, with their canine partners beside them. Their determination never wavered, each step a testament to the bond that had turned the tide of battle. Where the Galarkians had expected to find hesitation or fear, they saw only a quiet resolve, a sense of purpose that carried the humans and their dogs through every obstacle. As they moved, it became clear to the Galarkians that this wasn't just about skill or tactics. It was about something far deeper, something they couldn't replicate or destroy. With each passing minute, the Galarkians found themselves more cornered, more desperate. The remaining soldiers scattered, abandoning their posts and fleeing through the terrain, hoping to escape the humans' reach. Yet, every attempt to hide or regroup was swiftly countered. The dogs continued to track them, exposing each hiding spot. Every attempt at escape laid bare before the humans. There was no place left to hide, no tactic that hadn't been rendered useless. The Galarkians' once proud ranks were broken, and all they could do was run. For the humans, there was no need for celebration, no victory cries. They moved forward with quiet purpose, their eyes focused, their dogs ever alert, their presence steady and unwavering. They understood that their strength lay in their unity, in the bond between soldier and dog, a bond the Galarkians could neither predict nor comprehend. It was this bond, rooted in trust and loyalty, that had carried them through the battle. It wasn't pride or power that drove them. It was a shared understanding that they would protect one another, no matter the cost. The Galarkians, faced with this realization, felt a pang of something they had never before experienced: respect. They watched, in their final moments on this battlefield, as the humans and their dogs executed every maneuver, every action, with a seamless precision that could only come from years of dedication and partnership. These weren't just beasts, and their handlers. They were something much more, a force that could challenge even the most advanced technology in the galaxy. As the last of the Galarkian forces were driven from the field, A silent understanding settled over those who remained. The Galarkians, humiliated and broken, recognized that their defeat had been inevitable the moment they underestimated the humans. They had failed to grasp that strength doesn't always lie in the obvious, in machinery or in cold strategy. Sometimes, it's found in the quiet bond between allies, in the shared trust that transcends species and defies all expectations. In the aftermath, as the dust settled, the humans regrouped, their dogs beside them, both soldiers and canines aware of the role they had each played in this victory. The Galarkians, humbled and diminished, retreated from the battlefield, leaving behind the shattered remains of their confidence. For the first time in their history, they had encountered something that no technology could counter, something that couldn't be analyzed or calculated, a bond between species that had turned their assured victory into an undeniable defeat. In the silence that followed, the humans and their dogs stood together, quietly triumphant. No words were needed, no celebration necessary. They understood the power of what they had achieved, knowing that it was this shared strength that had driven them forward, that had made them unstoppable against an enemy who thought them weak. And in that quiet, shared moment of victory, humans and dogs alike knew that they had proven, once and for all, that there was more to their strength than anyone could see, a strength rooted in loyalty, in instinct, and in a connection no enemy could break.